It was Halloween night, and my friends and I were sprawled across the living room, watching horror movies and passing around a bowl of candy meant for the trick-or-treaters. The doorbell had been going off all evening, and we'd gotten used to the steady stream of costumed kids. But at around 9:30, things started slowing down. Fewer knocks, fewer footsteps on the porch. Most kids had called it a night. We were mid-movie when the doorbell rang again. I groaned, reluctantly pulling myself off the couch to answer it. When I opened the door, there he was. A kid, probably around 10 or 12, wearing the strangest mask I'd ever seen. It wasn't the usual kind you pick up at a store. This thing looked handmade, stitched together from some kind of fabric, with button eyes and a crooked, too-wide smile sewn across the mouth. There was something unsettling about it, but I shook it off, chalking it up to a kid's weird costume choice. Trick or treat, he mumbled through the mask, his voice low and muffled. He held out a plastic pumpkin bucket, but didn't move or fidget like the other kids had. He just stood there, staring at me through those button eyes. Nice mask, I said, trying to be polite as I tossed a few pieces of candy into his bucket. Stay safe out there. He didn't say anything, didn't even thank me, just stood there, staring. I felt a flicker of unease crawl up my spine. Okay, have a good night, I added, quickly closing the door. I returned to the couch, but the weirdness of that moment stuck with me. I told my friends about the kid, and they laughed it off, saying he was probably trying to be creepy. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I glanced at the window, half expecting to see him standing there, watching us. But the street was empty. An hour passed, and the doorbell rang again. I didn't want to answer it this time, but my friend Jess jumped up, eager to see if there were any late-night trick-or-treaters. I watched her from the couch as she opened the door. Guys, she called out, her voice tense. It's him again. I stood up, my stomach twisting. Sure enough, there he was, the same kid, the same creepy mask. He hadn't even changed his stance, still holding that stupid plastic pumpkin out in front of him. What do you want, kid? Jess asked, sounding more annoyed than anything. You were already here. No answer, just the same eerie, silent staring. Maybe his parents didn't notice he came back? One of my other friends suggested. I wasn't so sure. Something felt wrong, really wrong. Okay, dude, enough. We're out of candy, Jess said, closing the door in his face. I walked over to the window, peeking through the blinds, expecting him to leave. But he didn't. He just stood on the porch, staring at the closed door. My heart started pounding. What's his deal? I muttered, stepping back. Jess joined me, her face pale. He's still there, she whispered. Why isn't he leaving? We tried to ignore it, hoping he'd eventually go away, but 20 minutes passed and he didn't move. We turned off the porch light, thinking that would make him leave, but instead, he stepped closer to the door, closer than before. Okay, this is getting freaky, Jess said, pulling out her phone. Maybe we should call the cops. Before she could dial, the doorbell rang again, long and loud, but this time something was different. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement through the window. I turned to look and froze. Standing in the shadows just beyond the porch light were two more figures. They were wearing masks too, identical to the kids. Guys, I whispered, my voice trembling as I backed away from the window. There's more of them. The doorbell rang again, louder, more insistent this time. The three masked figures on the porch turned their heads in unison, staring through the window, right at us. And then, from somewhere in the darkness outside, I heard the sound of footsteps, approaching fast. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I heard the footsteps getting louder, closer. My friends were still standing by the door, confused, but when they saw the look on my face, they knew something was wrong. More of them? Jess asked, her voice shaky. I nodded, pointing toward the window. Outside, there's more of those things. Everyone scrambled to the window, peeking through the blinds. There they were, three figures, all wearing those grotesque stitched masks, standing completely still. Their button eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, watching us with eerie precision. They hadn't moved from the porch, but the footsteps I'd heard weren't theirs. Who the hell are they? Brian muttered, his eyes wide. Is this some kind of prank? But it didn't feel like a prank. It felt far more sinister. I don't know, I whispered, but we need to do something. They're just standing there watching us. Jess turned away from the window, her face pale. We need to call the police. This is too much. She grabbed her phone again, dialing 911 with shaking hands. As she spoke to the dispatcher, her voice was tight with fear. She explained the situation, how a kid in a creepy mask had come to our door, and now more of them were standing outside. The dispatcher promised to send someone, but with it being Halloween night, they were backed up with calls. They said it'll be about 20 minutes, Jess said after she hung up, her voice trembling. We just need to wait. 20 minutes. It felt like an eternity. Brian moved toward the front door, locking it, then double-checking the back door and windows. We'll be fine, he said, though I could tell he didn't believe it. It's probably just some kids messing around. They'll get bored and leave. But I wasn't so sure. Something about those masks, the way they moved or didn't move, felt wrong. It wasn't just kids playing a prank. The doorbell rang again, cutting through the tense silence. I jumped, my heart racing. What do they want? I asked, pacing nervously. They're not asking for candy, and they haven't said a word. Why won't they just leave? Brian shook his head. I don't know, man, but we should just stay inside until the cops get here. We all huddled in the living room, watching the windows, waiting for something to happen. The figures outside didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel their eyes, those cold like button eyes, on us, tracking our every move. Suddenly there was a loud thump at the back door. We all jumped, staring at each other wide-eyed. Brian sprinted to the kitchen, peeking out through the back door window. When he returned, his face was pale. There's someone at the back, he whispered. Another one. He's standing right at the door. My blood turned to ice. How many of them are there? Brian didn't answer, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We were surrounded. The doorbell rang again, this time from the front and back at the same time, like they were coordinating. What do we do? Jess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. My mind was racing, my pulse pounding in my ears. The footsteps outside started up again, circling the house. I could hear them moving from window to window, and each time I expected to see another masked figure peering inside. Then the power went out. The entire house plunged into darkness, leaving us with nothing but the faint glow of the streetlights outside and the growing sense of dread. Shit! Jess cried. The power! Stay calm, Brian said, though his voice was tight. Maybe it's just the fuse. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was intentional. We scrambled to find our phones, using the screens to light up the room. The eerie glow made the shadows dance along the walls, heightening my anxiety. We gathered in the center of the living room, our backs to each other, trying to stay aware of all the doors and windows. Suddenly, I heard a faint creak from the front door. My heart sank as I realized what it was, the sound of the doorknob turning. I shined my phone's light toward the door. The knob was slowly twisting, like someone was trying to get in. Without thinking, I lunged forward and slammed the deadbolt back into place, my hands shaking. Whoever was outside had almost gotten in. Guys, they're trying to break in, I whispered, my voice shaking. Brian nodded grimly, his fists clenched. We can't just wait here, we need to. Crash! Glass shattered from somewhere in the house. My blood ran cold as I realized it had come from one of the windows in the back. They're inside, Jess whispered, her eyes wide with terror. I turned toward the hallway, the broken glass crunching softly in the distance. And then, from the darkness beyond, I saw movement. Slow, deliberate footsteps. We weren't alone anymore. And that's when I saw it, a glimpse of the mask, its crooked, sewn smile illuminated for a brief second by the glow of my phone. They had made it inside, and they were coming for us. Before I could even scream, the front door rattled violently, and then silence. Except for one final sound, a soft, eerie voice from behind me. Trick or treat. It started when I found the costume. It was perfect for the Halloween party. A long, vintage black dress with lace trim, the kind of thing that looked straight out of a Victorian funeral. I found it in this tiny secondhand shop downtown, buried in the back corner under a pile of old hats and shoes. The shopkeeper didn't even seem to remember having it in stock, which should have been my first warning. But I was too excited about how perfect it was. When I got home, I tried it on. It fit like a glove, almost like it had been made for me. I twirled in front of the mirror, admiring how the fabric flowed. That's when I noticed it, the weight of the dress. It wasn't heavy, but it felt different, as if something unseen clung to it. Brushing off the unease, I went to the party. Everyone loved the costume. Compliments poured in, and for the first hour, I felt incredible, like I was embodying someone else. Someone confident, fearless. But as the night wore on, something strange began to happen. It started small. I reached for a drink, but my hand didn't stop at the glass. Instead, it knocked over a bottle. I laughed it off, thinking I was just clumsy. But then I walked across the room and bumped into a group of people, nearly spilling their drinks. My legs felt heavy, like they weren't mine to control. Then came the whispering. At first, I thought it was just the chatter of the party, but as I moved through the room, I realized the whispers were following me. I couldn't make out the words, but they were close, like someone was speaking directly into my ear. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were darker, almost sunken, and my skin looked pale under the dim light. As I turned to leave, I froze. In the reflection, my body hadn't moved. I could see myself standing there, but I wasn't in control. Panic set in. I willed my legs to move, but instead, I walked toward the door on the other side of the room, the one leading to the basement. I never wanted to go down there. I'd been avoiding it all night. My mind screamed to stop, but my feet kept moving, each step echoing in the silence. I descended into the cold, damp basement, the whispers growing louder. My hands reached for an old trunk in the corner, and I opened it without thinking. Inside was an old photograph, yellowed with age. It was a picture of a woman wearing my costume. She looked just like me, only from another time. Beneath the photograph, there was something else, a death certificate. Her name was stitched into the fabric of the dress. Eleanor Tate died 1872, cause of death, unknown. I tried to drop the photo to tear off the dress, but I couldn't. My body was no longer mine to control. As I stood there, frozen, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a single voice, low and chilling. "Welcome back, Eleanor." And then in one swift movement, my hands closed the trunk. The basement door creaked open behind me. Someone, or something, was coming down the stairs. My heart raced as I stood motionless, unable to control my own body. The basement door creaked louder, groaning as it swung open further. Footsteps echoed on the stairs, slow, deliberate, heavy. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs were rooted to the ground, my hands still clutching the death certificate. The voice inside my head, the one that had whispered to me all night, seemed to smirk. "You've been chosen." Chosen for what? My thoughts were spiraling. What was happening to me? The footsteps grew closer, and with each step, I felt an overwhelming presence closing in. The room suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick and stale. I tried to turn my head, desperate to see who or what was coming, but my body wouldn't listen. It was like I was trapped in my own skin, a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. The cold presence was right behind me now. I could feel it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and the chills seeped through my bones. My body betrayed me again as I slowly turned toward the stairs, my eyes widening in terror. There, standing in the doorway, was a woman. She looked exactly like the woman from the photograph, exactly like me. Her eyes were hollow, dark, and void of light. Her pale face was twisted in a haunting smile, and she wore a tattered version of the same black dress I had found. But it wasn't just her resemblance that terrified me. It was the look in her eyes. She wasn't a reflection of who I was. She was a reflection of who I was becoming. I tried to speak, to plead for mercy, but no sound came from my throat. The woman took a step closer, her bony hand reaching out toward me. Her fingers were ice cold, brushing against my skin as she traced the line of my jaw, her touch lingering as if she was claiming me. "It's time," the voice inside my head whispered again. Only this time, it was louder. It wasn't just in my mind anymore, it was coming from her. Suddenly, memories that weren't mine flooded my brain. Images of Eleanor Tate, her life, her death, poured into me like a rushing wave. I saw her dancing in grand halls, laughing with people I didn't recognize, only to end up lying cold and lifeless in the very same dress I now wore. I felt her pain, her anger, her desperation to hold on to life. She had been trapped in this dress, and now she wanted out. She wanted me. No, I thought, trying to fight it. This isn't happening. This isn't real. But it was. My body moved closer to hers, like a magnet being pulled. I could feel her spirit merging with mine, the coldness seeping deeper into my bones. I was becoming her, and she was becoming me. In one final act of defiance, I tried to tear the dress off. My fingers twitched, shaking as I reached for the lace at the collar. But just as I began to pull, her hand clamped down on my wrist, stopping me. Her grip was impossibly strong, and her eyes, those dark, empty eyes, stared into mine with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. "You can't escape," she said, her voice a haunting echo in the room. "The dress is mine, and now so are you." I could feel myself slipping away, the line between Eleanor and me blurring with each passing second. My thoughts, my memories, my identity, they were all fading. It was like I was being erased, replaced by her. But then, through the fog of my own mind, a single thought cut through. The photograph. With the last ounce of willpower I had left, I forced my gaze to the trunk, to the old photograph of Eleanor. It had to mean something. There had to be a way out. I didn't know how or why, but I knew it was connected. Maybe, just maybe, if I destroyed it. Summoning every bit of strength I had, I lunged toward the trunk, my fingers grasping the fragile edges of the photograph. Eleanor's cold laughter filled my ears as she realized what I was about to do. "You think that will save you?" she hissed. "You're already mine." But I didn't stop. With a final burst of energy, I ripped the photograph in half. For a moment, everything went still. The cold vanished, and the oppressive weight lifted. I gasped for air, my body suddenly free from Eleanor's grip. But before I could celebrate, a sharp, agonizing pain shot through my chest. I doubled over, clutching at the fabric of the dress as it tightened around me like a living thing. It constricted, squeezing the breath from my lungs. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping, chaotic. And then, in a voice that echoed through the room, Eleanor spoke again. "You thought you could destroy me? No, dear, you've only begun to understand." The dress pulsed, and suddenly my vision went black. I felt myself falling into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the basement anymore. I wasn't even at the party. I stood in a grand hall, lit by flickering candlelight, surrounded by figures in Victorian attire. They danced silently, their faces blank, eyes fixed ahead. I looked down at myself. The dress was still on me, but now it felt complete. A chill ran down my spine as I realized where I was. This wasn't my world anymore. I had crossed over into Eleanor's. The music stopped, and the dancers turned toward me, their hollow eyes filled with hunger. Eleanor's voice echoed one last time. "Welcome to your new life." I turned to run, but the doors slammed shut behind me. The walls began to close in, and the dancers stepped forward, their faces twisting into grotesque smiles. I screamed, but there was no escape.